and this is my prompt hierarchy slideshow. First, I'm going to give you an overview of what we will be talking about in regards to prompt hierarchy. First, we're going to talk about what is a prompt, when do we use prompts, what are different types of prompts, what is prompt hierarchy, what are the two most basic prompting hierarchy strategies, what is MTL prompting, what is LTM prompting, and how do we know which prompting hierarchy to use. And lastly, we have my references. So first, what is a prompt? A prompt is the hint or cue you provide to help a learner increase the likelihood of engaging in a correct response. It also decreases rate of incorrect responses. Prompts are important because it allows us to better assist our learners so that they can be successful in learning new skills or behavior. When do we use prompts? It is typically added simultaneously with the instruction or after the instruction is given. For instance, in this visual, we have our SD, which is normally our antecedent, then followed by our behavior or the response, then the consequence or the reinforcement. So the prompt is between the SD and the behavior. That's when we add it. Next is, what are different types of prompts? So we have a long list of prompts here. So let me start off with full physical prompt, or FP. This one is a hand-over-hand assistance to guide learner through the task. Then we have partial physical prompt, or PP, which is similar to full physical prompt, but the assistance is actually more limited, which means you could be just touching the learner's elbow. You're not doing a hand-over-hand assistance. Then we have modeling. This one is a demonstration of response when it is given to the learner, so the learner can imitate. Then we have gestural. This one is literally pointing towards the items or even nodding towards the object. Then we have full verbal prompt, or FV. This one is vocally providing the entire response. Then we have partial verbal prompt, or PV, which is similar to full verbal prompt except part of the response is provided. So for instance, if your SD is what does a cat say? A full verbal prompt would be meow. Then your learner would say meow. Now, if you do a partial verbal prompt and you say, what does a cat say? And your partial verbal prompt would be me. And then the learner should say meow. That's the partial verbal prompt. Next would be positional prompt. Positional prompt is the correct stimulus positioned closer to the student. So you literally purposely put the stimulus near the student so that it is more clear that that's what you want them to choose. Then we have visual prompt. This is a cue as a way of picture, text, drawing, or object that could lead to the response. Then we have time delay, which is a cue given after a certain amount of time has passed. Then we have the independent or the plus sign. which means that no cue or assistance is added. So the independent is the goal that we want to achieve. So what is prompt hierarchy? A prompt hierarchy is the way of ranking the prompts to help identify how invasive the prompts are to learners. So, for instance, all the way in the bottom is the full physical prompt, then partial physical prompt, then modeling, then gestural, then for full verbal, then partial verbal, then visual, positional, time delay, and then independence. So the most invasive goes all the way on the bottom, and the top would be the least invasive, which makes sense because independence, we don't give them any prompt, we don't give them any assistance, which means it's not invasive at all, right? Next, we're going to talk about what are the two most basic hierarchy strategies. So we have most to least prompting, then least to most prompting. So we have the most to least, and that would be full physical, partial physical, modeling, gestural, full verbal, partial verbal, visual, positional, time delayed, and independence. And that goes from bottom up. Okay, so again, most intrusive to least intrusive. Then we have the least to most prompting, and that would mean you would start with independence or even time delay, positional, then fade to, or not fade, but positional, then go to more intrusive prompt would be visual, then partial verbal, then full verbal, then gestural, then modeling, then partial physical, then for full verbal. You get my gist. So let's talk about what is MTL prompting. Like I said earlier, this is the most intrusive prompt. So you start with the most intrusive prompt to least intrusive prompt. So this one is used to reduce errors made by learners, starting with the most intrusive prompt, then gradually proceeding to less intrusive prompts. For example, if you give an SD, and you are holding a picture and to a learner, and you give the prompt car, right? The verbal prompt, full verbal prompt of car. The response of your learner should be car. And then you give the reinforcement of tickling our learner, right? Then the next prompting strategy, or the next, again, this is a process, gradually fading that prompt, would be the SD would be holding up a picture. Then the next prompt, you're not going to say car because that was a full verbal. Now we're going to use the next least or the less intrusive prompt rather, and that would be the partial verbal prompt, which is ka, right? So the response should still be car, and your consequence or your reinforcement would be great job or good job, that's a car. Next, we have a least to most intrusive prompting, or LTM, and this one is used to provide learner with an opportunity to independently respond to the SD by starting with the least intrusive prompt, then systematically and gradually increase in prompt hierarchy level. And this is the key, only if the learner needs them. So for example, if the SD is Akao says, your prompt could be a written text if your kiddo knows how to read. A written text that says moo, right? So your learner would say moo, and then you can tickle your learner. Then the next step would be, again, since it's a textual or visual prompt, now we have to actually increase that, right? So if your kid cannot say moo and incorrectly did say moo, we have the SD of a cow says, and your prompt would be moo, and that would be a full verbal prompt. Okay, so from written to full verbal prompt, and then the correct response would be moo, and then you give your learner a reinforcement of good job, a cow says moo. Okay, then lastly, how do you know which prompting hierarchy to use? So decisions about which prompts and prompting hierarchy to use will be based on our initial assessment results and our current data. In other words, it will be individualized. We cannot assume that everybody will have to use a most to least or least to most prompting. It will be based on the kiddo. And here are my references. And the end. And thank you for listening. I hope you learn about a prompt hierarchy. Thank you.